There are moments in a person's life that don't announce themselves. No warning, no preparation, just a single ordinary step on an ordinary night, and then everything quietly shifts. It was the kind of cold that makes you walk faster, that turns your breath into small clouds that disappear before you can watch them go. Daniel had worked a long shift, and the wind was doing what February wind does in the rural edges of Vermont, finding every gap in your coat, every inch of exposed skin, pressing in without apology. He had his head down. He was thinking about nothing more than the warmth waiting for him on the other side of his front door. That's when the street lamp caught something on the ground near the base of a snow-dusted oak. He almost didn't stop. He told himself later it was instinct. The same instinct that makes you pause when something is wrong even before your mind can name it. The shape was small, too small, curled into itself against the roots of the tree, dusted with a thin layer of new snow, as if the night had been slowly trying to cover it over. He thought it was a stray kitten. This part of Vermont had plenty of them. Cats that wandered too far in autumn and couldn't find their way back before winter locked everything down. He crouched. He reached out a gloved hand. And then the lamplight found the markings. The tufted ears were unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. Short, dark, like little brushstrokes at the tips. The coat was spotted, not the solid gray or orange of a barn cat, but a dappled pattern that spoke of something older, something that had been moving through these woods long before anyone built houses here. The paws, even curled beneath the tiny body, were disproportionately large. A bobcat kitten, barely alive. Its chest was moving just barely, in shallow, irregular pulls. Its eyes were closed. It was not aware of him at all. Daniel did not think. He unzipped his coat and wrapped the kitten inside it, tucking the opening closed with one hand and pressing it against the warmth of his chest. He walked fast. Then he ran. There is no manual for what he did next. He'd read enough, lived long enough in the woods to know the basics of hypothermia, in animals as in people. You don't rush the warming. You don't use direct heat. You bring the temperature up slowly, steadily, and you watch. He laid heating pads under a folded layer of towels in a cardboard box. He covered the kitten with a second towel, loose and light. He set a lamp nearby for ambient warmth and sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, and his eyes on that small, motionless chest. He told himself it was just one night. That was the agreement he made with himself sometime around midnight, when the kitten had stopped shivering and started making the faint, broken sounds of something trying to come back. Just one night. In the morning, he would call the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center 2 counties over. They had the training, the permits, the proper setup. This was not his world. He was a man who worked in logistics and fed a house cat named Milo and went to bed at a reasonable hour. This was not his world. He repeated this to himself through the long hours. The kitten's breathing steadied sometime before 3 in the morning. Its paws flexed once, slowly, as if testing whether they still belonged to it. Daniel exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. He didn't hear Milo come in. That was the thing about that cat. 11 years old, gray and deliberate, with the quiet movement of something that had long ago decided the world could wait for him. Milo appeared in the kitchen doorway the way he always did, as if he had simply always been standing there and you'd only just noticed. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the box. He crossed the room at his own pace and sat at the edge of it, studying the kitten with the focused, unreadable attention that cats reserve for things they are genuinely trying to understand. Daniel watched him. He was ready to intervene, certain that at any moment Milo's instincts would reassert themselves, that the hissing would come, the puffed tail, the retreat. Milo was a gentle cat by nature, but this was something else, something that smelled of the deep woods, of wildness, of a category of creature that sat above Milo in every instinctual hierarchy. Daniel's hand hovered near the box. Milo leaned in, slowly, without hesitation, and he began to groom the bobcat's frozen ears. Long, deliberate strokes, the same motion he used on his own paws each morning by the window, patient, certain, as if this were simply a task that needed doing, and he was the one to do it. Daniel did not move for a long time. There is something that happens when you witness an act of care that has no logical explanation, no survival advantage, no social reward, No reason rooted in anything you can name. Something in your chest goes quiet. You stop trying to explain it, and you simply watch, because some things are larger than explanation, and the most honest thing you can do is let them be exactly what they are. He stayed on that kitchen floor until morning. Milo never left the box. He woke to silence, the particular kind that tells you something has changed while you slept. Daniel found Milo curled tight around the bobcat kitten in the box, chin resting across its back, rising and falling with each shared breath. The kitten's paws were moving in slow, rhythmic twitches, dreaming, maybe, or simply remembering how to be alive. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. The rehab center's number sat on the screen, and he stared at it for a long moment before making coffee instead. The days that followed had a rhythm he hadn't planned for. Milo appointed himself without ceremony. No hesitation, no adjustment period. He was simply there, constantly, in the specific way of someone who has decided a thing matters. He brought a toy mouse to the edge of the box on the second morning, and nudged it inside with his nose. When the bobcat cried, a thin, reedy sound unlike anything Milo had heard before, Milo answered it, every time. A low, steady meow that seemed to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." When the bobcat slept, Milo slept around it. When it stirred, Milo was already watching. Daniel tried separating them once, gently moving Milo to the living room and closing the door. Within 20 minutes Milo had found the gap at the bottom and worked at it until it swung open. He walked directly back to the box without looking at Daniel. The message was clear. By the end of the first week, the bobcat was eating soft food first, then small pieces of protein that Daniel prepared carefully, researching late into the nights. Its eyes had fully opened, a clear and striking amber, and it tracked movement with an instinctive precision that was entirely unlike Milo's domestic leisurely gaze. It began teething on the corner of a cabinet. It climbed Daniel's arm with needle-sharp claws and sat on his shoulder, absolutely certain that this was a reasonable thing to do. Milo watched all of this with the patience of a senior employee, observing a new hire, occasionally demonstrating the correct way to slow blink at a human, or how to properly accept a head scratch without making it look like you needed one. But beneath the gentleness, the wild was already there, in the angle of the bobcat's crouch before it pounced, in the way its nose lifted and held when a window cracked open and let in the cold outside air, in the stillness it carried, total, focused, ancient. Daniel stopped calling the rehab center, not permanently, but he stopped calling. Something was unfolding in this house, something he didn't have a name for yet. Here is growth in wild animals doesn't happen gradually. It happens in surges, sudden, undeniable, like the land itself is pulling them toward what they were always meant to become. Within weeks, the bobcat's paws doubled in proportion to his body. His legs lengthened, his shoulders filled with a quiet, coiled strength that changed the way he moved through a room. Less kitten, more predator. Even in the soft light of a kitchen at midday, Milo never flinched. That was the thing Daniel kept coming back to. Every instinct should have told that old gray cat to reassess, to create distance, to remember the hierarchy. But Milo held his ground with a calm that bordered on wisdom. When the bobcat's play became too rough, Milo simply stood still and waited until it passed. When it pressed against him with weight that now nearly matched his own, Milo leaned back, steady, certain. The call from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center came on a Tuesday. They were thorough, professional, and kind. The bobcat, healthy, strong, showing all the markers of a viable wild candidate, was ready for transitioning. They had a protocol, a timeline, a process designed to give him the best possible chance at a full wild life. Everything they said made sense. Daniel thanked them and wrote down the dates. He built the outdoor enclosure that weekend, 12 feet long, 8 feet high, anchored into the cold spring ground with posts he set himself. The bobcat explored every inch of it within the first hour, scaling the platforms, pressing his nose into every corner, tracking a moth along the upper edge of the fencing with absolute concentration. He was magnificent out there, undeniable. There was no honest way to look at him in that space and wish him smaller. But every evening, without fail, he came to the glass door. He would press his broad forehead against it and look inside, not frantically, not desperately, but with a quiet, deliberate focus aimed directly at wherever Milo was in the room. And Milo would cross the floor and sit on the other side of the glass, close enough that their breath fogged the same pain. Two cats, two worlds, one thin sheet of glass between them. Daniel stood back and watched this each night, and the question that had been forming for weeks finally took its full shape in his chest. The bobcat was ready for the wild. That part was no longer in doubt. The question was whether the wild was the whole answer, or whether something had been built here, quietly, in towels and heating pads and toy mice, that also deserved to be honored. He didn't have the answer yet, but spring was coming, and it would ask the question for him. Here as spring arrived the way it always does in Vermont, not all at once but in quiet permissions, a morning where the frost didn't return, a week where the mud softened and the tree lines began to blur with the first pale green of new growth. The forest at the edge of Daniel's property came back to life, and the bobcat stood at the far end of his enclosure each morning, nose lifted, reading all of it. The day came on a Thursday. Wildlife staff arrived calm and unhurried, the way professionals are when they've learned that gentleness is the most useful tool they carry. Daniel walked the enclosure one last time with Milo beside him, the old gray cat moving slowly, deliberately, as if he understood the weight of the morning. The bobcat pressed his head against Daniel's hand, then against Milo's side, long and slow. Then he turned, walked to the open gate, paused once at the threshold and stepped into the trees. He did not look back. That was the right way. Daniel had known it would be, and it still took everything he had. The house was too quiet for days. Milo wandered room to room with a low, searching cry that Daniel had never heard from him in 11 years. Not grief exactly, but something close to it, something that had no cleaner name. Daniel second-guessed himself in the small hours of the night, the way you do when a decision that was correct still cost you something real. He checked the trail camera more out of habit than hope. The footage was time-stamped 3 weeks after the release. Edge of the woods, low light, early evening. The bobcat sat at the tree line, bigger now, filled out, carrying himself with the full authority of a wild animal in his own territory. He was watching the house, still, patient. The audio captured it a moment later. 2 soft meows from the porch where Milo sat in the dark, and a low, rumbling response from the tree line that the microphone barely caught but caught enough. Daniel watched the clip 4 times before he could breathe normally. He opened the back door that evening without thinking much about it. Milo stepped onto the porch, and from the shadows at the wood's edge, the bobcat came forward, not fully, not past the boundary that was now his by nature, but close enough for Milo to reach out and touch noses with him in the dark, before he turned and disappeared back into the trees. He had stayed only one night, but what he left behind had no expiration date. Some bonds don't ask permission, they simply take root in the quiet, and they hold.